LinkedIn News.
First and foremost, the message is not that people shouldn't be passionate about what they do or shouldn't feel a connection to what they do on a day-to-day basis. But what the research shows is that the thing that drives how we feel about our jobs when we come home day to day is not necessarily the fact that we find meaning or connection with the stuff that we do, but the quality of the connections that we have with the people that we work with. And so an additional bonus to that is a sense of like, I feel fulfilled in this context. That can be great, but it's not sufficient for having decent job satisfaction.
That's sociologist Erin Cech. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned for more on why passion shouldn't be the sole way for us to think about our careers. Make sure you hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you're a regular listener, thank you. And consider leaving us a review so we can keep bringing you more of the kinds of conversations that you love. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually, in relationship to others, and to the world around us. Okay. I know I'm not alone in having adopted the belief that finding your dream job is the key to that feeling of never working a day in your life. This mantra is actually a fairly modern concept, though, specific to millennials and Gen Zers. Our parents, baby boomers, and Gen Xers weren't taught this en masse. Instead, many of them looked at employment as something we simply must do, not to be confused with our passions, our hearts, or our personal interests. These days, the advice to follow your passion when choosing a career is almost trite. But my guest today, Professor of Sociology at the University of Michigan, Erin Cech, argues that this approach is not the answer for everyone. There are unacknowledged and undiscussed repercussions, she says, for prioritizing just passion in the context of work. And they're based on your social identity, so your class background, your gender, your race, etc. Erin fleshes this argument out in depth in her book, The Trouble with Passion: How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality. And while Erin's not arguing we completely do away with the dream job ideology, she is suggesting we look at this piece of now status quo career advice through a more critical lens. As someone who embodies the passion principle, I was intrigued to talk with Erin to hear what I might be missing, especially as I'm often the one encouraging others to just go chase their own dreams. Here's Erin.
I started this process looking at a completely different set of questions. So I was interested in understanding the continuation of gender segregation in occupation. So why we see that men and women tend to be in different kinds of fields in the United States and other places. And so I started with interviews with college students and was asking them, why are you choosing this major? What do you want to do after graduation? And it was sort of like I was hit upside the head by the commonality of the language they used to talk about career decision-making. It was almost like I handed them a script. And the script ended up being this idea that I want to follow my passion, or I want work that's fulfilling. I'll figure out the sort of job security stuff later, but that's the thing that's really driving me. And I wasn't looking to write a book on passion. I wasn't looking for a space of critique about this topic. I will often say that I was a passion evangelizer. I would tell students that came in my office that they should follow their passion. I followed my passion into the career trajectory of sociology. And so the idea that I needed to take a careful look at what passion was and the potential negative implications, as well as the overwhelming positive ones that tend to be the topic of discussion in society more broadly, was something that really required the data to scream at me for me to focus on.
So you're saying that the people you were talking to were following one very specific script, which is like not unfamiliar to me at all. It's follow your passion, follow your purpose. Don't be that person who like gives up all their hopes and dreams for some job that's just going to pay you.
Absolutely. So the passion principle is the idea that the best way to make career decisions is to prioritize what we find meaningful and fulfilling to us personally. Things that people are passionate about tend to be things that they have an emotional attachment to, things that they love or find exciting or interesting, a kind of cognitive attachment. So things that they like to think about, like to tinker with in their own mind, and often a kind of biographical connection. So this is something that feels like a deep part of who I am and has always been with me. I've always loved to do XYZ when I was a kid. And so now I like to do ABC as an adult, as a professional. So the idea of the passion principle is that we should prioritize those considerations when we make career decisions, often over and above things like the salary that we can earn and the sort of stability and security of those jobs. And even if we personally might start to question the idea whether prioritizing passion is good for us, there's this overwhelming cultural notion that it is. You can find couch cushions and cell phone covers that say, do what you love what you do.
You'll never work a day in your life.
Exactly, yeah. Right? I mean, Steve Jobs' most famous commencement address said exactly this, right? And so it's this sort of overwhelming social current of how we're supposed to be making career decisions.
So this was not always a thing, right? Like I'm a millennial, I'm 36. I think about my parents who are both in their 70s, they're baby boomers. They did not grow up with people telling them, pursue your passions. They are much more, it's really about security. It's a good job. I want to know, where did this start? Because this isn't our creation as millennials and Gen Zers, but it is our narrative, right, in our paradigm. So how did this all get started?
If you look at career advice books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, even into the early 70s, the advice they give is totally different than what we would see if we picked up what color's your parachute, the kind of classic idea of, prioritizing the things that you love, right? And the narrative there was figure out what you're good at, find a job that's stable, and if you happen to like it or find it interesting, that's a bonus. But you should figure out how to make your way in the labor force based upon your skill level, your education, and your ability to access stable work. And that aligned with the sort of expectations for people of those generations, particularly those who had a college degree and were privileged in that way, because the typical career trajectory looked a lot different than it did today, right? There was the expectation that if you entered an organization and you worked hard and you were able to do what you were expected to do, you would move up within that organization, right? Maybe people might change an organization once or twice in their career, but you started and you moved up the ladder. So since the 1970s, we have this huge increase in precarity of employment in professional workplaces and professional careers. So the kind of precarity of not knowing if you're going to have a job next week or next month that used to be most principally characteristic of blue collar work, service work, up until sort of the 1970s, has now become characteristic of most everybody in the labor force. And so the professionals who used to be able to count on having a job that you worked 40 hours a week, not 60, 70, 80 hours a week, is now different, right? There's now this space of precarity. So you might expect that there is a couple of different ways that people might react to that kind of precarity. One way might be for the most privileged to grab the most well-paying, the most stable jobs that they can, right? I'm going to go into the thing that will employ me the longest for the most pay and prioritize that. But instead, what has happened is that people have said, well, I'm going to be working for these long hours and expect to be kind of devoted to my job, and my job's not stable anyway. so I might as well follow my passion.
Mm-hmm.
And that aligns very clearly with this explosion in the expectation culturally that we are able to express our individuality, express ourselves in every fragment of our lives, right? It's not just our clothes and our cars, but it's in the kind of Cuisinart we have in our kitchen and the color of it and the cell phone covers that we have. Every facet of our lives are supposed to be individualized and self-expressive, and our jobs are absolutely part of that as well.
Okay, so you started, if you go back to where you started, you said, I never meant to actually even do this, right? You weren't meaning to go out and write a book. You kind of stumbled upon this thing because of the question you were asking and the answer you were getting. When did you realize it was a problem?
It became evident to me that it was a problem when I started to understand what the profound differences were by class in the ability to take what you're passionate about and parlay that into stable, gainful employment. So one of the primary findings from my work is that there's really no difference by socioeconomic background in the extent to which people are committed to the idea of following their passion, the extent to which college students, for example, want to prioritize passion seeking and what they want to do after graduation. But there's profound differences in the ability to take that passion and make it into employment. And what blocks particularly low-income first-generation college students from being able to do that is they lack two types of things. One is they lack safety nets. They lack financial safety nets in terms of parents who can pay their tuition or help pay their cell phone bills, the safety nets of their parents being able to support them in unpaid or underpaid internships that are the kind of career launchers for a lot of fields, particularly those outside of science and tech. And they also lack springboards. So these are those informal connections. We call them social capital in sociology. This idea that my dad's friend knows somebody in this industry that can connect me to a start-off job, or my parents are professionals and they taught me how I'm supposed to dress or how I'm supposed to write my resume so that I'm competitive for these professional jobs. And so what I find in the labor force overall is people who have the same level of education or in the same field but come from lower class, working class backgrounds are significantly less likely to be in jobs that are well paid and are in their passion than people from wealthier families. The third thing for pointing to the issue of equity, this is really central in that by culturally believing that following our passion is the best way that we can make career decisions, not only disadvantages those who don't have those safety nets and springboards, but it blames the individuals who weren't able to have the same advantages for their own lack of disadvantage. This is something that I call choice washing, the sense that, okay, you wanted to come and be a cello player in an orchestra, like that was your passion. And because you didn't have the springboards or safety nets, you couldn't get there. All of a sudden, that becomes the individual's fault for the lack of resource and lack of access they have, even though that's a deeply structural problem.
You say that it's impacting people who are coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. How does it impact people who are wealthy, or does it at all in a negative way?
What's really interesting is the one population that I found were most willing to question the idea of prioritizing passion were actually people from the highest socioeconomic backgrounds, in part because they had the resources, they had family telling them, like, this is what investment looks like. This is what it means to have and sustain a career that will get you this sort of income that will allow you to continue your standard of living that you're familiar with or comfortable with. But even for people who have the safety nets and springboards, the idea of pursuing a career field and prioritizing your career decisions on the basis of sense of fulfillment has existential risks to it, even if it doesn't have financial ones. And by that, I mean, if we follow our passion, we are handing over control of a central part of our sense of identity to a global economic structure that was not principally designed to support our sense of fulfillment and self-expression, right? It was designed to continue the interests of the people who own the organizations and run the companies without necessarily a whole lot of attention to the passions and spaces of self-expression of the people who work in those spaces.
I certainly was someone who always wanted to find work that allowed me to feel passionate and, wake up every day and enjoy going to work. I've had roles, though, where I have not been passionate. And it took me, from 28 to 36 to really start to see how valuable it was to ask the question of myself more often in my jobs, each job I was in, what am I optimizing for in this job? So for the first time ever, at age 31, I went into a job that was not optimized for anything I'd ever optimized for before, which had been money and recognition and, the things that a lot of us are taught to. I was optimizing actually in this job for space. I needed space to think. I needed space to figure out what I wanted to do. I needed time. And I felt some shame around that. I felt shame telling people what I was doing and then wanting to over-explain why I had made that choice and why it was important to want space and not necessarily to chase money and success. What did you find is detrimental and is important to know about how we make this a moral conversation when it comes to choosing the job that we do?
So this appears in a couple of ways. So one is that when we are on teams with other members of our workplace, and some of us are passionate and some of us are not, there is a tendency to judge those team members, not only that aren't passionate, not only in a sense that, oh, well, they're not as committed, but often to question their competence. So there's a really strong connection between the sense that somebody is passionate about the work and the idea that they are good at it, right? And when I talk to people, there's this general sense within the passion principle that if you're passionate enough about it, you'll put in the work to get good at it. That passion has to come first. The skills, the expertise will come later. And so that is something that is underlying the way that we evaluate our colleagues of well, if you're not passionate about this, are you really going to put in the work? Are you really good enough to be doing this work? And so there's a lot of that questioning that leads to what I describe as the expectation for the performance of passion, right? It's this additional burden to perform this sense of fulfillment in the work that they do. That is absolutely exhausting and certainly a recipe for burnout. But in addition to that is the expectation that is put on blue collar and service workers from professionals who are passionate about their work. You can see this all over the place. So, for example, there was a placard in front of a Starbucks that said, "Our passion is to serve you," right? Or I went to a hotel once and the hotel workers had little things on their name tag that said, "Hi, my name is X and I am passionate about whatever," and the underline was supposed to be filled in with something that was about customer service. The third example is WeWork for a while had expectations that the cleaning staff wore T-shirts that said, "Do what you love," right? This sense of not only are we expecting service workers in particular to have impeccable customer service in terms of being kind and
warm and
generous in spirit to the people that they're serving, but to do it in a way that expresses their passion is bonkers, right? So it's not enough that the barista has good customer service and is friendly, but they have to find meaning in the latte art. It's an additional register of exploitation in the expectations that we put on service workers and blue-collar workers as well.
This is where we got into some of the discourse of how do you think through a topic like this? What are you saying? Are you saying that we shouldn't be doing this at all as a society? Are you saying there should be equal access for anybody who wants to be able to pursue their passion? Are you saying there should be a one-size-fits-all?
First and foremost, the message is not that people should be passionate about what they do or should feel a connection to what they do on a day-to-day basis. But what the research shows is that the thing that drives how we feel about our jobs when we come home day to day is not necessarily the fact that we find meaning or connection with the stuff that we do, but the quality of the connections that we have with the people that we work with. So are we treated with dignity? Do we have good relationships with the people that we work with? And those are the things that on a day-to-day basis, when you're asked, do I like my job or not, tend to be the things that drive that. And so an additional bonus to that is a sense of like, I feel my meaning is fulfilled in this context. That can be great, but it's not sufficient for having decent job satisfaction. So what I'm working for or working towards is the sense that passion shouldn't be the standard to which everyone is held when we're asking them what do they do for their job and expecting a good answer. One of the things that I talk about is the idea of stepping back and asking ourselves, not what am I passionate about, but what is the relationship to paid employment I want to have? And that can look like a lot of different
That's a good
things.
question.
Right? So that can be, I want to be all in for a cause that I find important and meaningful. And therefore, I know that I'm going into a space where I'm going to be putting a lot of effort that is not necessarily going to be compensated in my pay or in time off, etc. Other people might say, I want my job to be able to support my family or to be able to support me in the things I have outside of work that I really value. And being able to be frank with ourselves about what it is we want from that relationship to paid employment is really important. So first, we have to recognize that people have a lot of different motivations for why they work hard and why they want to work hard. And it's just as valid that somebody wants to work hard because they need to support their family or maybe need to support an extended family than it is that they're driven by their passion. At the individual level, in addition to asking ourselves what kind of relationship I want with paid employment, if the answer is, I am passionate about my work and I'm not willing to change, the things that you can do are to, first of all, try and shrink the footprint of work in your life, right? How can you make the time that you are on, that you're invested in doing your work more efficient so that you have more time that's freed up for other pursuits? Can you make a commitment to yourself or to your family to have email-free Tuesdays and Thursday nights or not work on Saturdays or something like that so that you are providing yourself the opportunity to fill your life and your time with other things? And the second thing is what I call diversifying your meaning-making portfolio. And by that, I mean thinking hard about what outside of work really, really drives you. Like, what are you super interested in? And maybe it was something that you did a long time ago. I played violin in high school. I dusted that thing off while I was writing this book because I felt like I needed, a passion project outside of the work that I was doing. And make space in your calendar for that investment in those additional passions. And it can be a lot of work, especially for busy professionals. Like, you have to work to make room in your schedule for that kind of thing on a regular basis. But investing the time is really important because in the instance that you lose your job or you get reassigned and all of a sudden that sense of identity is no longer there to rely on to perform in your job, you have other pieces of identity, of self-expression that are waiting for you.
Before we go on break, let's recap. The passion principle, as Erin calls it, isn't just harmful to people from poor and working class backgrounds. It also harms people with the most privilege in our society by facilitating the link so many of us feel between our career and our sense of self-worth. When we come back, Erin paints a picture of what it looks like when we don't prioritize passion in the context of our careers. We'll be back after this. And we're back with Erin Cech. I love the idea of diversifying your meaning-making portfolio. What I wonder, though, at the same time, and this feels like a very Western world American problem. I think about people who are, maybe wanting to be an Olympic swimmer or some sort of professional in sports. And our typical answer is like, well, you got to work your butt off, and you do have to give up a lot of those things in order to get that thing. So I can imagine there's an argument too for like, well, if I expand my meaning making portfolio, that takes time away from building the thing I say I want to build. And when I look around at, all of the companies and the people who are in these roles and doing these things at a professional level, it looks possible. So what would you say to someone who says that and is like, but people are making it and they're saying that their relationship to their employment is not just passion, it's also money?
I mean, part of it is that the extensiveness of that hard work, of that grind, belies the fact that there are so many other workers that are working 2 or 3 or 4 jobs in order to support their family. That hard work can manifest in a lot of different ways. And so we don't want to uphold hard work in and of itself as a sort of moral valuation, potentially. Nor to deny the fact that there are a lot of other workers that are pouring a ton of time and energy into the work that they're doing. It's also important to recognize that it's not just that like the Steve Jobs of the world got there because they worked hard. They got there because they have social and economic privileges. They're of a particular race and class and gender that allowed them to have the ramp up to where they were in a way that's not the privileges that everybody has. And so using the people who have been successful as some kind of recipe for how everyone can do it, and if you don't get to that level, it's somehow your fault, is just blaming individuals for what is inherently sort of social and economic inequalities. And one of the things that kept coming up in my work that actually ties back to why I started to do this work in the first place, which is to understand gender segregation, is that when we tell young people and adults in professions that they should follow their passion, the idea there is that people say, who am I? What do I find fulfilling and self-expressive? But because of deep-seated gender and racial and class processes, who we think we are is deeply gendered and racialized and classed, right?
1000%.
And so when we give people kind of carte blanche freedom to say, follow your passion, do what you love, it turns out they tend to follow the same paths that generations before them did. And we see a reproduction of that kind of gender and race and class segregation with occupations being reinforced through this process that seems like it's based on choice, but is really kind of the baking in of those broader social processes into the kind of pathways that people are seeking.
I think this is a really complex conversation because I immediately go to like, well, I'm African American. I grew up around all sorts of people, but many times in our culture, it's like, well, there are people who are really talented in sports that didn't come from anything and they had a dream and they made it happen. So while I agree with the idea of like it is so unfair to hold people to a standard that was never set for them to succeed, right? But when we also look then at people who have made it beyond that, it gives hope. And so as someone who loves to study and think about well-being and who also thinks about mindset and how so many of us catch ourselves or put ourselves into positions where we're buying into things that won't support our growth or success, I think about like what's a self-fulfilling prophecy versus the ability to say, well, I don't see anybody who looks like me over there, but guess what? I'm still going to go do it, And so I have internal tension around that because, for example, I could have easily said, there's no one else really, or a lot of other people don't look like me who do this work. Maybe I shouldn't do it. And so it's like I'm going back and forth between that feeling of I want people to achieve whatever they're meant to achieve, and I don't have a right to decide what that is, but I also don't want to put them in a box, And so I'm trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, it's so challenging because the message around passion and around sort of career decision making in general is individualistic in some ways because it's directed at individual career decision makers. But
Right.
this is a story about structures. This is a story about institutions and the way that those institutions and the cultures around them advantage some and systematically disadvantage others. And so
Yeah.
when we're thinking about how we support students from all contexts, trying to think about what's next for me, it's a balance of saying, we want to set you up for success as much as we can, right? How do we set up an infrastructure that allows you to have access to the same safety nets and springboards that your more privileged peers have? And
Yep.
thinking about how to change the infrastructure to be more like that, to allow students to pursue whatever pathway that they want in a way that is more equitable than it currently is now.
I want to know, in the research and the work you've done, what was your biggest surprise? What was your aha moment?
There's two that I'll mention. One is the idea that people were interested in pursuing passion was not just because they wanted a good job, but they saw it as key to a good life. So for them, it wasn't just about, I want to like my job, but it was, this is how I see my life unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think in the literature, so we look at what it means to be in a sort of post-industrial society, postmodernist space, what does that mean? For most people, it means developing this kind of self-reflexive project that we're all supposed to have this story about ourselves that we've continued to like refine and change and alter who we are and the stories about who we are and who we want to be over the course of our life. And there's fewer and fewer places collectively outside of work for us to do that, right? So there's fewer community spaces that we're connected to. There's the secularization, which means that most people are less connected to sort of a church community or some kind of faith-based space. And we look at our career trajectory as a ready-made pathway for that pursuit of identity. And so that is something that the depth of that, the extent to which that really drove to the core of people's sort of existential understanding of themselves really struck me. The other piece that surprised me was I did an experiment where I had people who were in the professional workforce evaluate different job applications for the same job ad. And some of the applications had cover letters that emphasized their passion for the work. Others emphasized that they like the location or they respect the organization. And I found that the passionate applicants were far more preferred over applicants that emphasized other things, even though every other thing about the application was exactly the same resume, credentials, etc. And the reason that the passionate applicants were preferred was not only because people thought that they would be harder workers, but they expected them to put in additional work without an increase in pay. And there was no pay premium given to the passionate
For passion.
applicant. Right. So
Yeah.
It was very clear to me that it's not just that that many employers value passionate workers, but they see the additional labor that passionate applicants will put into the organization as an unpaid benefit to the organization.
You know, you just reminded me that in the last few years that I've been in work that I am really passionate about, I have been more likely to burn out than before. And I wouldn't take any of it back for anything. But one of the biggest challenges I've had is creating boundaries around what I love. Because we've been sold this, I go, well, passion's good. It's good for me to be obsessed with this thing. I can learn more and I want to keep going. And yet that is exactly what leads to burnout. And so you can have too much of a good thing. So I'm curious, if everybody in the U.S. read your book and said, I got it, I want to do something differently because of it, paint the picture for me of what work looks like and what our life looks like in this context.
I would start with the way that we engage with even young children. The question that we ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, is expected to be answered with an occupation. Right? I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a public figure. Not, I want to be a good neighbor. I want to be kind. I want to be a good community citizen. I want to be a sort of leader in social justice. And we set up those expectations for a sense of identity so early on that they're really baked into what it means to like pursue a career. And so if you speak to young adults about their career decision making, it's so stressful to them because it's so wrapped up in a sense of identity. So really readjusting the way that we talk to young people about what it means to be employed and what careers actually look like, to allow them for a wider range of motivations and reasons for pursuing whatever field that they want, separate from a sense of identity. In addition to that, thinking about our teams, our workplaces, making sure that we're not expecting a performance of passion from our colleagues and seeing that as equating to skill or commitment to work. And then also for our own selves, making sure that we're checking in, not only about making sure that we're making space in our lives for other things that we find meaningful, but that we're being effectively compensated for the work that we're putting in, and that our supervisor or our boss knows how much work we're putting in, driven by passion, not
Correct.
by anything else, right? And then finally, not judging ourselves, not soaking in the cultural idea that you have to be passionate about your work, or if you're not, that you're doing something wrong.
I love these. You basically gave like 4 principles, which I totally got. You know, we all remember being asked when we were really young, what do you want to do? And it's like you become a human doing versus a human being, people say, right? What changes as a result of us doing these 4 things you just laid out?
I think a healthier relationship to paid work and a recognition of work for what it is, right? We are exchanging our work, our time, our energy for payment that allows us to live, to do the things that we wish to do. And stepping back and saying, if that is what work is fundamentally, where do I want to be with that, right? Having kind of clear eyes about what it means to do this is really powerful. And it's also making sure that we are recognizing the ways that this idea of the passion principle is embroiled in institutions in a way that perpetuates the kinds of inequities that we've been talking about is so important. Mm-hmm. That when you have organizations or institutions of higher education that are promoting passion and filtering people into the organization on the basis of passion, that has the opportunity for all these processes of inequality to be reproduced.
Okay, Erin, I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements. The first is, better humans are.
Better humans are willing to meet each other as whole selves.
Better work is.
Better work is work that provides the balance between work and life that is central to our priorities.
The last one is, a better world has.
A better world has people who fundamentally treat each other with dignity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for being here. And I just so appreciate hearing your perspective and the research and the work. And you've definitely given me a lot to think about. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Erin Cech, Professor of Sociology and author of The Trouble with Passion: How Searching for Fulfillment at Work Fosters Inequality. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could help them out. And support other people like you in finding our show by leaving us a rating before you go. While you're at it, write a 1-sentence review telling me and the team what you love about Everyday Better. And as always, you can get me in your inbox by signing up for our weekly personal development newsletter, giving you practical tips on how to level up with small steps every day. Find it in our show notes for this episode or at linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's linkedin.com/everydaybetter. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Coop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.